So the gamelan is like one big instrument with lots of different parts of it, right?
Uh-huh.
So, what are the different parts of the gamelan?
Yeah, so, and you'll have to forgive me because, one, I'm terrible at pronouncing these things. and two, I might, like, give sort of general names for things because, like, I'm trying to remember their exact name. But, so we have the, well, let's start with Qajar. So we have Qajar, and, did you go to the Gamelan concert? Okay.
Yeah.
That was that thing that was going like boop, 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 boop the entire time. That's the Qajar. Sometimes it gets more interesting parts, but most of the time not. Which, side note, that is deceptively incredibly hard, especially with all the interlocking going on. And like,
and you have to like keep the steady beat constantly.
Yep.
You have to have a really good inner metronome.
Yep, no, you have to be a strong person to play that. So we have the Qajar, we have Chang Chang, which is like a little turtle, a little wooden turtle with like 4 little tiny cymbals on its back, and then you have 2 little handheld cymbals, and that's like the little motor of the ensemble. It's like,
okay.
It's very rhythmic, it's very like sort of prominent. You can't really miss it. So we have that. We have the rayong. That's that really long thing with all the pots on it. That tends to be a very soloistic instrument. And we had one member sort of improvising during our first piece. So we have that. We have the gongs, right? We have the kipor, which makes like side note, the Indonesian like language, as I understand it, I'm not an authority on that. Yeah. Maybe I should say, as it pertains to this ensemble, is very onomatopoeic, meaning that all of the names for things are very practical and they represent the same sort of like sounds. At least with the gongs, they do.
Yeah.
So you have this sort of like big gong, you have like this little middle gong, and you have this tinier gong, and then you have like this other gong with the little knob kind of pushed in, and that's more for sort of like rhythmic. It gives more of a ting-ting sort of sound. It's very standard pattern is like 1, 5, 7, 1, 5, 7, 1. It kind of like repeats on that. And everybody else is based on the gong cycle.
Yeah.
Gong cycle and the Qajar are like what's dictating the whole shebang of where everybody else is. So those are kind of like our foundational sort of instruments. Then we have like the gongsa. The gongsa are like the barred instruments, right? So the smaller it gets, the faster it goes is like a good way of thinking about it. With the sort of like with the smaller gongsa, they interlock with each other. They're the sort of like busy sounding things, right? And somebody's always like sangsi or polos. Sangsi is off beats, polos is on beats. And in some cases, like sangsi is harmony and polos is like just melody. So and then we have sort of the larger, more bassy gongsa, and what they're doing is they're actually the melody players, right? All the sort of like noisy stuff and like the that really kind of catches our ear, especially in sort of from like a Western US/European sort of like perception. We are listening to the top line for a melody,
right?
Whereas in gamelan, the melody is actually in the middle,
right?
So these kind of larger guys here are the ones actually playing the melody, and what they're really giving are like structural pitches, and which is kind of sad because you kind of like lose them over the mass of other things, but in an ideal world we would have more of those. Yeah, and then we have our sort of like big Balinese drums. Those are incredibly virtuosic, and the drummers are also sort of like directing the ensemble. They're directing the tempo.
Okay.
Right. Our gong is giving us sort of our like cycle structure. Right. It's outlining how many beats we have, and our drums are driving the tempo.
Okay.
Which it seems like the kajar would be doing that, but the kajar is really like,
Yeah.
he's got to follow the drums or he's in some trouble, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and hello.
Hello. Being interviewed?
I am being interviewed. Actually, we're talking about Gamelan. Do you want to like? Wait, actually, no, never mind. I don't want to like take you away from your thing, but I feel like you're much better at talking about this than I am. I don't know.
I mean, I can dedicate 2 minutes to it.
Okay, can you give a brief blurb about Balinese drumming?
Sure. Is there a specific question or just kind of that's it?
I was just rambling and I don't know.
We were
enough.
just talking about like the different parts of the gamelan and
Okay.
what
The
they're
drumming,
doing.
so you have 2 drums which play in interlocking patterns. One drum is called the male drum, one called the female drum. The male drum is slightly higher pitched than the female drum.
Right.
Now, do you know the symbolism of that? Why? Because you would think it might be the opposite,
Because
right?
females are closer to the earth.
Very good. All right, been reading your book. And so, so the drum patterns basically work in what we call a very close canonic imitation. So that if I'm playing one rhythm, on the female drum, the male drum's going to play the exact same pattern a 16th note earlier.
Okay.
So like if you clap this rhythm, go ahead. Keep going. And then I'm going to do the same rhythm. Help her up. So
Okay.
Oh, got it.
power of numbers.
Here's my test.
But don't see what happens. Westerners we always want to get into unison, but you have to stay completely separate but interdependent. So one more time, a little slower. Down, bum, ba, dum, bum, 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 bum. You can do it. You can do yes, yes. You can do it. So that's the basic principle, but then, is all kinds of different permutations and combinations and variations of that. And the drummers are leading the ensemble. So all of the cueing, the tempo changes, everything is from the drum. So the gong is like the center of the universe, but the combined male-female drum part is like the president or the prime minister, kind of giving the commands, giving the direction. So there you have it.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. So what part of the gamelan do you play?
So we tend to like rotate because, we're like, I mean, everybody in here mostly is kind of like new to it. Obviously outside of Dr. Bakken, but,
Yeah.
So I normally was on the gongsa, principally because I am terrified of non-pitch percussion. But I actually did play Chang Chang in the last concert, and it was different.
Awesome. So why did you choose to become a part of the gamelan ensemble?
Yeah, so I don't like it when I don't like. Well, that makes it sound like people do like it. I like when I am confronted with something that I feel very like ignorant about. Not like that sounds like a harsh word, but like I just don't know anything about
Right.
it, and I'm not familiar. And I really wanted to dip my toes in those waters, and like because I read things on Gamelan, right? But like it's a completely different thing to actually do it.
Right.
And so I was like, I really want to do this, and I think it'll be good, and it'll be a good way to kind of like stretch my brain. And also as a musician, you want to like have as many different experiences as possible because then you're a lot more flexible.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of looking into like the performance aspect of the instrument. So like what kind of pieces do you guys play like for your concerts? Like what are like the purposes and things for those pieces?
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting because, so first of all, I think one of the large assumptions with like world music concerts in general, which also the term world music is loaded with like all kinds of like, sorry, I thought I heard a cat meow. That was weird. All right. It's riddled with all sorts of like, you know, like the term just assumes a lot. Mm-hmm. It assumes a lot, and I don't like it, but it's the term that's like kind of like most used at the time,
right.
At this time, so you kind of have to. But anyway, so one of the big assumptions that I see, especially because I was like I was and am a grader for this course, and one of the biggest things that I saw that would like make me feel like was like this ancient thing or this old thing or whatever. And I was like, okay, but like most of the pieces that we played, actually I would say all of the pieces that we played at that concert were written in either the 20th or 21st century.
Okay, so there are like modern gamelan pieces.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Gamelan has actually turned into a very sort of, it's turned into like a hyper competitive sort of thing. It's kind of like what happened with powwows.
Okay.
Where like, you know, powwows used to have sort of like this, I mean, they still do, but now they're like competitions, right? And, you know, they're like big things and there's like big stakes going on. Yeah. It's like that. That has happened with gamelan. And different forms of gamelan have since emerged as a result of that. But we're sticking to a lot of the same sort of like structures, and the structures are defined by how many, they're defined in terms of like numbers and in terms of sort of like phrase sets.
Okay.
Like gong cycles. It's determined by like what gong cycle are we using, how many beats do we have, how many sections of this are there. That's what we're going to call the piece. Yeah. It's kind of like in like Western classical music when you're like symphony number 4 in E minor, you know?
Yeah. So are there like a lot of different gong cycles that you guys use, or are there like some main ones that?
Yeah, so there are some main ones, and you're gonna have to forgive me because I don't know the name of them.
That's okay.
But so, well, one of the pieces that we did on that concert was a composition by Dr. Backen's former teacher.
Okay.
And he's actually teaching at the University of Illinois right now. And he sort of made this composition, and that actually has a very sort of, he composed that gong cycle, so it's not something that's like traditionally used or like sort of known, and for that reason it was kind of like difficult to like, I think for our gong player it was difficult to learn, and then also it was difficult to implement, but I think it worked out fine. But yeah, so the really sort of like big basic one in Balinese gamelan is like the sort of like 1, 5, 7, 1.
Okay.
1.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you can also have that. You can add sort of like the little, we call it like the seahorse, because like the mallet is shaped like a seahorse.
Yeah.
And like you can add different patterns to that. Like I think the pattern used in this last concert was like ta da ta.
Okay.
Like, ta da ta, for like probably like half the gong cycle. It's like at like 1 at the start, 1 and halfway through. So on and so forth. All of these things repeat constantly. They don't change.
Yeah.
And then that's actually the principal one. Outside of the composed piece, I don't recall another gong cycle that we've used, but that obviously doesn't mean that that's the only gong cycle.
Yeah, so like the gong cycle can like stay the same, but what all the other parts are doing changes.
Yes.
Okay. So we talked about there being kind of modern gamelan pieces now, what are some of the more like traditional things that the gamelan would be played for? Do you know?
Yeah. So one of the big things, like I'm sure you probably like read in your book, are like funeral processions.
Right.
That's a really big thing. You know, and the idea is that, you know, like the power of like the gamelan, and also sort of like maneuvering of like the casket and the tower and all this stuff, you know, like that will help sort of like scare away like evil spirits. What's interesting though is that on the sort of like gansa, there you might have like noticed that there are all these sort of like carvings on the side. Yeah. So like actually on the gangsa, that sort of like dragon looking dude, he's actually considered like an evil spirit, but he's like a good evil spirit. Like there's nuance in that, which I think is interesting. It's like he like, it's like an evil spirit that is like, he's like, but he has a sort of like conscience, and he wants to like protect like the sort of middle world from the evil spirit. Yeah. Yeah. So, oh yes, back to sort of traditional things. Yeah. So there's that. There's also not in Ketchok. Oftentimes there would be, well, actually no, you know what, it is Ketchok. There would be like these little puppet shows.
Okay.
And they would accompany this, and it would be a huge thing, right? Mm-hmm. And like we're talking like this could go on for 48 hours straight. Wow. Like really long.
Okay.
And it's kind of like this communal thing. It started off being like a communal thing, and it would stay for like, 48 hours or something, and they would just have like all these puppet shows. And these puppet shows weren't directed towards children; they were directed towards like everybody.
Right.
And but like the puppets themselves wouldn't be like out; it would be like the shadow. Mm-hmm. We would be like, it would be behind a screen. There would be like some light back here, and somebody would have like the little puppets, and then they would be kind of, their story would be getting told through these sort of like, through the Ketchok, through the performance, through the music, through all that other sort of stuff. And all of these are very sort of like well-known like tales in Indonesian culture.
Okay. And
so like they're kind of like reaffirming these sort of ideas, especially with like, this is like a good evil spirit, this is a bad evil spirit, that we know this one's a good evil spirit because he kicked this bad evil spirit out of like the middle world and blah 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 blah. Yeah, those are some of the more traditional things.
Okay. So Dr. Bakken mentioned the male and female tuning. How, because like I've seen the gamelan, so like how do you tune the gamelan?
Oh, so in terms of like, do we like tune the instruments?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
But so the way that that's kind of structured is that it's harder to see from far away, but with the gangsa, you have a set that's just slightly larger than the other set. Mm-hmm. And you have two of everything, first of all.
Right.
And one is always just a little, the bars are just a little smaller than on the other one. So that's how like the pitch is sort of like tuned differently. In terms of like is one in like G or one in D or whatever.
Yeah.
It is actually, and this is sort of like where their sort of tuning system and ours are divided, is that not divided, that makes it sound like there's contention there, but that they actually want it to be pretty close to the other pitch because they're looking for that cyclical wave sort of sound. That's part of what like gives the gamelan life, propels it forward, gives it power, makes it able to kind of be like, back up off this casket, you guys. Yeah. Like, we're trying to get our homeboy here to the the upper world in like as safe way as possible.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we don't tune them except for the drums. The drums have like these little knobs, and like so they have all these kind of like hide strings, and you have to kind of like pull them up so that way they tighten the head. And that just helps with like the intonation of the drums. The drums are also paired male-female, and one's tuned higher than the other, but you also don't, the reason they can even go down at all is because if you constantly had them at that tension, then like the drum would sort of like denigrate faster. But
Yeah. So because the pitches are like so close together, is it difficult to know when it's in tune?
I think that this is gonna sound really bad. We're not super concerned about intonation.
Okay.
We are concerned about right notes, and that, you know, as in most music, comes very apparent.
Right.
When that happens. But in terms of like intonation, we're not really that concerned because again, we want that sort of like like
The
cyclical
wave
thing.
sound.
Yeah.
Okay. So specifically for like the FSU ensemble, so when you guys like join the ensemble, do you have a lot of prior knowledge of the gamelan, or are you all like fairly like on the beginning level?
So you are not required to have any knowledge about gamelan, about like, you don't have to be like a musician to join the ensemble. Like everybody's kind of like coming in at it at a sort of entry level. They're obviously sort of like repeat offenders, you know what I mean, in the ensemble. But yeah, most people are coming at it from a completely new stance, with the exception of like Haley Nutt in our last performance because she studied Balinese drumming with Dr. Backen over the summer. Specifically for that.
So there are like, you can like take gamelan lessons, like the way that we would take like cello lessons or voice lessons or something like that.
I think what she did is she did like a directed independent study with him.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I lost where I was in my questions. I'm so sorry. So this concert was mostly like modern gamelan songs. Like, do you guys play a lot of traditional music, like from like earlier, or?
I mean, yeah, it's, well, also it's kind of one thing about sort of like tradition in music is that it's always kind of like growing with the culture. And so I think like, especially like when we're like thinking about things like folk songs, you know, like God knows how old the tune for, you know, wait, no, never mind, that's a bad example. You know, like where, like how long was the tune for Star Spangled Banner around before it became Star Spangled Banner? Because originally it was a drinking song, and then like where did it come from before that, you know? I don't know, you know, in terms of like, I don't know the history of our pieces well enough to be able to kind of say like, oh yes, this one is rooted in like whatever sort of century or things like that. But I think that stylistically, they tend to be kind of within the same sort of like style as more traditional things.
So are there ever like other instruments that play along with the gamelan, or is it always just like gamelan solo?
Well, Well, so, and that's also like a thing in terms of like gamelan, like today in and out of Indonesia. And because, you know, people have like fused gamelan with like rock or gamelan with like whatever. Gamelan was in this sort of like weird indie Italian movie, and that's how it blew up, and ethnomusicology is kind of weird. But anyway, but yeah, so actually, well, there's an Indonesian flute called suling, and that gets featured. We also had in our last concert, not the concert this semester, but before that, the Rainbow concert, we had a guest soloist named Hai Chung.
Okay.
And she's a guzheng player, which is like the sort of like 17-string like sort of lap harp thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you gotten to that part in your book yet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Then you got. Yeah. So she was actually soloing on that with our piece, and she actually wrote the piece that we were playing.
Okay.
And yeah, so you can get in some like variety there.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So I know that it's like disrespectful to step over any of the instruments because it like disrupts the balance of the universe. Is it disrespectful to like play them a certain way, or to play like certain pieces for reasons other than what they were originally intended?
Oh, okay. That's an interesting question. I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, within reason, right? Like if you're like, because we are treating these instruments as living beings, and so like if I were to, you know, like just beat the crap out of it, like that's not very nice.
Right.
But in terms of the only other thing that's like a big sort of no-no in like the gamelan is that you don't play gamelan with shoes on. Because it's kind of like, and this is like a prominent thing in like a lot of cultures just generally.
Yeah.
It gets like pinned on like Asian culture a lot, but like I have seen it all over the board where like you like taking your shoes off before you step inside someone's house.
Right.
So the world music room, when we're in gamelan sort of like rehearsal, is like the gamelan's house. This is where the gamelan lives. Therefore, we need to respect it by taking off our shoes before walking in, so as not to track dirt all over the gamelan's floor. You know.
Yeah. Right. So I know that there are like two different kinds of gamelan, right? Is there like a big difference between the two, or are they fairly similar?
Yeah. So there's Javanese and Balinese. The set that we have is Balinese.
Right.
And the instruments are a little different. And to what extent, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Yeah.
But they're a little different. Oh, wait, no. Okay. Javanese has another bar
Okay.
on the gong set. It has another pitch
Okay.
that the Balinese does not have. And then there are other differences that I don't know. But yeah, so there's that. And just in terms of like where it sort of like comes from, I mean, obviously there's the island of Java and there's the island of Bali.
Yeah.
But Javanese is much more associated with like court music. It was sort of performed for royalty, for esteemed guests. It's kind of like highfalutin stuff. And so consequently, a lot of Javanese stuff is not quite as like, it's not quite as rhythmic. It's not quite as like, you know, I'm trying to think of a word that's not aggressive because I don't like that sort of connotation. But it's not quite as like intense. Yes. Because it's supposed to be, you know, for like soirees and you know like welcoming your king and blah blah blah. It's very sort of like stately kind of stuff. Whereas Balinese has a very specific purpose of like, we're using this to get rid of spirits that could hurt my family member. Therefore, we need to go hard or go home. You know.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Awesome. I just have one more question. So is the gamelan something that is ever played for like personal use? Like, do people just like have them in their homes and like sit down and play them sometimes, or are they mainly just like for like court or rituals or entertainment?
I don't know. Well, it would be hard to play the gamelan by yourself.
Right.
Just because there's so many different layers to it, and the ensemble, the way it's set up, and the way that the music is set up is that, like, if you can have two people doing the same, like, one thing, better. That's better.
Yeah.
You know, and sort of like our culture, we focus a lot on individuality and like kind of like I can do everything myself. Whereas in a lot of other cultures, like Indonesia, there's sort of more of a focus on like community and working together and things like that. So the sort of idea of the gamelan is to be able to like work with someone else and like combine all these elements together to get like the sort of product that you couldn't get by yourself.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anyone has them just kind of hanging out. I do know that some people have made like chromatic ones, so that way they can play like full blown things on on one instrument. But I don't know. That would be an interesting thing to look into.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody has like something in their house somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know if they have a full blown gamelan in there. That'd be
Yeah.
a lot in there.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Gamelan in my basement.
Yeah, you know. Hey guys, you want to hang out?
As one does.
I know. Oh goodness.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions I have.